Thank you, President Teresa. Today's speaker is Dr. Yoshiko Herrera, who is a professor of political science at University of Wisconsin-Madison. She teaches classes on post-communist politics, comparative politics, and social identities. Professor Herrera received her BA from Dartmouth College and PhD from University of Chicago. She taught at Harvard University before moving to UW-Madison in 2007. Her research interests include politics in Russia and Eurasia, nationalism, and political economy. Today, she will discuss with us the reasons for Russia's invasion in Ukraine, how the war is going, and what can be done. We look forward to her presentation, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way of saying thanks for speaking to us today. I also wanted to mention that we will have a Q&A with our speaker at the end as time allows, but please wait for the microphone if you have a question. Let's welcome Professor Herrera to our podium. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to try to be brief so that we have some time for questions. And I'm going to start actually, oh great, I have to realize where to focus here. Okay, so you can see the two screens here. I want to start actually first with just a map of Ukraine because the map actually gives us some important information. And the first thing is about the size of Ukraine. So in the top left corner, you can see the size of Ukraine within Europe. It would be, if you think of Western Europe, Eastern Europe, the largest country in Europe other than Russia. If you see the picture of Ukraine transposed on the eastern part of the United States, you see what a large territory it is. And on the right-hand side, you see in red, those are the areas that Russia currently controls, which is about 20% of the country. So it's a large territory, and I think that's important for understanding the dynamics of the war and what an incredible choice it was by Vladimir Putin to decide to invade and to try to take over the entire country. I want to start with the general question that I think a lot of people have of why Putin invaded Ukraine. I mean, some people thought Russia's a bad actor, it's expected, but many people, including myself, were surprised by the decision to invade and the decision to go to Kiev just because I thought there's no way he would win. Ukraine is too big. There's too much resistance in Ukraine. It just didn't make any sense. It was going to be a war that would ruin Russia economically, politically, for decades into the future, and not to mention cause incredible damage to Ukraine. So I think the question of why Russia invaded is kind of puzzling. And I'm going to suggest a couple of background factors, but I want to note that the decision to invade actually was a decision by President Vladimir Putin of Russia, and the responsibility for the war really rests with him. Sorry. Okay. I think the first thing that's come up and that you see a lot in the news is the role of NATO. And was NATO a threat to Russia? Did NATO expansion cause the invasion of Ukraine? And I want to note that NATO is important, but it's important symbolically. There's a sense of humiliation that Vladimir Putin has tried to promote about the 1990s in Russia. This is following the end of the Soviet Union, when Russia as a country and the other 15 countries of the former Soviet Union broke up. Russia became an independent state, and Russia is economically devastated at that time and militarily quite weak. So the sense of the 1990s is a period of humiliation for Russia. When they say, in Russia, they say Russia was on its knees. And NATO expansion in the later 1990s and early 2000s is considered a kind of symbol of this humiliation of Russia. So it's not that NATO was posing an objective military threat to Russia, but the NATO expansion is considered this sort of humiliating episode for Russia. This is from the Russian perspective. The second point is that Ukraine, why Ukraine? Why not any of the other former Soviet republics? And the basic answer is that Ukraine stood up to Russia. As long as the other former Soviet states follow along with what Russia wants, whether that's in Central Asia or Belarus, then things are fine. But Ukraine, at various points in its history, starting earlier, but especially with the breakup of the Soviet Union, Ukraine was very adamant about sovereignty and having its own state. And 2 times in its history since the end of the Soviet Union, in 2004 and in 2014, there were social protests and revolution in Ukraine that kicked out pro-Russian leadership, actually the same person, Viktor Yanukovych. And Ukraine had made a choice to go with the West towards democracy and away from Russia. And this is very threatening to Putin because he doesn't like to see a successful social revolution right on his border. Another factor is that Russians, and especially Putin, just are in complete denial of the existence of Ukrainian nationhood, of Ukraine as a Okay. Is that okay? Weird. Okay. So Putin is in denial of the existence of Ukrainian nationhood and sovereignty. That means he doesn't want Ukraine to exist as a separate state, and he wants to deny the nationhood of Ukraine. And this goes along with the kind of background imperial sensibility of Russia being the dominant player and having a right to boss everybody else around. But one thing I want to note is that there wasn't a lot of Russian-Ukrainian ethnic hatred in the run-up to this war, and there still is not to a large extent. There's a lot of propaganda on TV, kind of genocidal comments on the part of Russian commentators, but I don't think as a matter of how the populations feel about each other, especially from the Russian side, there was not an obvious anti-Ukrainian hatred like you see in some other countries, and that's another one of the reasons it was puzzling. But overall, I think we can say that this is just a massive miscalculation by Putin in the sense that this picture is of the long table. That is Putin meeting with his economic advisors right after the war started. I want to note that this long table business is actually a new thing in Russia. It's not something that we saw before this war, and I mean, there's speculation that he is immunocompromised, or he's worried about COVID, or that he's worried about an assassination attempt or something. Oh, sure. But the long table is kind of a symbol of his isolation and his lack of connection with other people in terms of getting information. Okay, so why was it such a massive miscalculation? One is he thought Ukrainians wouldn't resist. And as I said before, it wasn't just that this is just an informational problem, but it's a problem of denying the nationhood of Ukrainians. If you know any Ukrainians, if you follow Ukrainian politics even a little bit, you can see that there's a very strong level of resolve and commitment to statehood for Ukrainians. And so the idea that they would just accept a Russian takeover is sort of absurd, but he didn't see that. That's the first and important thing. Second is he's probably buoyed by previous military victories where he thought he could get away with this. And those go back to the Chechen Wars, Georgia in 2008, Crimea was the Putin regime has done such a good job in making people feel that their actions are pointless or futile. The sense that people have is that if I go out and protest, I may lose my job, go to jail, who's going to take care of my family, and no one will support me. It will be a waste of time. No one in my country is supporting me. Who's going to take care of whatever my obligations are? And I will just be alone in prison. Now, they're not sending every single person to prison, but that is a fear. And so you imagine that you're in a job or you have responsibility. It's a hard choice to make to go out and to protest. And that's why you're seeing the 17-year-olds, 18, 20-year-olds who don't have other family responsibilities, et cetera. Those are the people out protesting. The elite are sitting around thinking, what can I do? What's the point? I mean, they could do more. Any of the government ministers could do more. But they know that they will also be punished. The main opposition figure in Russia, Alexei Navalny. This is the person that Putin tried to assassinate last year, who bravely went back to Russia and was promptly arrested over a year ago. Just over the weekend, he was moved from the penal colony where he was at to an undisclosed location. Not good news. American WNBA basketball player Brittany Grimes still in jail. There's very little we can do with prisoners in Russia to get them out, unfortunately, other than pay attention and try to track them. But unfortunately, the Russians hold a lot of cards when it comes to imprisonment. Okay, so with that depressing news, what's next? Okay. I want to note, on the left-hand side, this is Overture Center. Right after the war, they had a Ukrainian flag behind the orchestra. They turned the organ into yellow and blue. I want to just say, as an American, I've never seen somebody studying politics for over 20 years, never seen another country's flag so visible in America. I mean, we just typically do not do that. Even during wars that we've had, there isn't the outpouring of support. And I think it speaks to the bipartisan level of support, but also the moral clarity and simplicity of this issue of Russia invading without any pretext, just inflicting this damage on another country. The picture of the Capitol is the sort of support rally, one of the support rallies for Ukraine in the early days, and the one on the bottom is just from Monday night at the airport. That's Madison Airport putting up the colors. So some people think these things don't matter, but I think actually community level support for Ukraine does matter, because the war is costly to the West, to Europe, and to the U.S., especially in terms of energy. If anybody's following gas prices, this is a really serious issue, and it's important, I think, to stay united and to continue to support Ukraine in whatever way that we can. At the moment, this push for military weapons is one of the key ones, but the energy sanctions and dealing with energy issues in the United States is also important. Okay, so what can we do? My point about supporting democracy is as a general matter. I mean, as Rotarians, listening to your four-way test and the work that you do, I mean, I think you're already engaged in supporting democracy. But all of us can talk to family, friends, et cetera, our circles, to explain to people why is it important to stand up to a country invading its neighbor. And inflicting this kind of human and economic damage on another country, and the wrongness of it. It's not a complex situation of hard to understand what to do, et cetera. We know what to do, which is to support Ukraine in this. I think that there's still a role for giving money to humanitarian agencies, but I think also the political support is really important, and so you can contact Ron Johnson, Tammy Baldwin, Mark Pocan, anyone to express your support for continued support from the United States for Ukraine. I think this is really important. It seems like the war is in a some people are calling it a stalemate. It's not a stalemate because it's a very intense conflict, but it's now located in the eastern part of the country where there's not as much information. But it's really, we're in a very critical time where Ukraine needs to remain able to fight back this Russian threat in the east. So thank you very much. And I just want to note, I have the CRECO, the Center for Russia, East Europe, and Central Asia website up there. If you wanted more resources about articles, about different things, or about if you did want to give money and you wanted to know about places, you can go to the CRECO website to do that. Okay, thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much for this wonderful information for us. You said we will beat Putin. He will go down. And I didn't quite understand how you think that's going to happen.
So I said Putin will stop when he is stopped. So what I meant by that is he is not going to voluntarily back down, that somebody is going to have to stop him in order to stop this Russian aggression. So the Ukrainian army right now is who is battling him. But Putin himself in power, I think that's a bigger question of how long he'll last and what level of support he has within the country. Sure.
I've got a question back here. So thanks for your talk. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about China and India's relationship with Russia and their support. I just saw today that the first vehicle bridge was opened between China and Russia, and they made a big deal about it. Flags are going back and forth between the two. So that's I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is actually a critical time for China. Putin would like to think that their relationship, as they noted at the last Olympics, is a friendship without limits. However, China has so far gone along with the sanctions regime. So I think China's facing currently a couple of huge problems. One is the COVID and the way that they're handling it with these lockdowns, and second is economic problems within China. China knows that the vast majority of their trade and their economy depends on trade, not just with Russia, but with the U.S. and other Western countries. So I think that the economic factors are going to make China very unlikely to give up on all that in order to support Russia. So they've kind of tried to play it both ways by saying, like, yes, it's true the Americans are very annoying and we support Russia, but they ultimately have so far stuck with the sanctions. And I think that's going to be the key thing. And if we move to secondary sanctions, which I would support, then I think that's going to put even more pressure on China to show which side it's on. India, I think, is a little bit more complicated case because you have a populist, undemocratic leader there, and they're currently benefiting from a little bit lower fuel prices coming from Russia because of the changes in Europe. But India is not on the narrative of support Ukraine because it's democratic does not play very well in East Asia or South Asia, especially, countries like Singapore or China. They're not in favor of democracy. The narrative of don't allow the big country to roll over the small country, or don't allow the big country to just take over its neighbor, I think is a more effective narrative. So I think that both India and China are trying to play it sort of both ways and play up some of the anti-Westernism, anti-Americanism. But I think when it comes down to it, we'll see what happens with whether they comply with the sanctions, and so far they are.
Hi there, back here on your left.
Oh,
Hi,
yes.
thank you so much for this talk. This is really fascinating, an issue that we care very much about. The news from Ukraine has not been particularly good particularly in the last few days, but I heard with great enthusiasm that you think that Ukraine will ultimately win. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and why you think that, and leave us with some optimism.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe one way to qualify it is what does it mean to win? So will Ukraine maintain its statehood? And I think that I'm very optimistic about that, because I just don't think Russia has the forces and they lack the motivation in comparison to Ukrainians in terms of taking over the whole country. I just think it's completely impossible for Russia to take over the whole country. So will Ukraine remain a state? Yes, I think they will. The question is on the east. Like, will Ukraine be able to fully push back Russian forces to the pre-February 24th line? And I think that's a little bit more iffy right now, especially because of the negative news. The way that Russia fought its war of attrition in Chechnya, in the Second Chechen War, which went from 2000 to 2009, is they also faced a region that had a lot of resolve against Russia, and they bombed them relentlessly for 9 years. And an incredible amount of violence. They cut out all international media. It's also in the context of 9/11 and other issues. But the Russian strategy was just to punish relentlessly. And so I think that strategy is probably less likely to work to the extent that the world cares about the atrocities and the war crimes, et cetera. So that's why I don't think a 9-year campaign of bombing the East is going to win. Although the war in the East has actually been going on since 2014. But I'm a little bit more optimistic about the war ending sooner because I just don't think Americans or Europeans are willing to see that. But I would agree that I wouldn't say with certainty where the boundary is going to be, because I think that's going to be a matter of the military outcome.
What is the impact of Germany on all this, and have they not been somewhat circumspect about energy purchases and the like? And Tom Friedman had a column a week or two ago about the unity of the EU, and has Germany's shift on energy buying made a difference?
Yeah, actually, in Ukrainian, they're now using the word Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, his last name as a verb, which means to hesitate, to say you're going to do something and then not do it, to Scholz. So Germany is kind of, it's unclear. Germany is really important. It's a major buyer, it's a major industrial power whose industries rely on energy. And so they cannot just cut off all of their supplies of Russian oil and gas immediately, although they have agreed to cut off Russian oil by the end of the year. Russia preemptively is trying to cut off the gas supply to send a signal, et cetera. But I think it's hard to say. I mean, Germany at the start of the war immediately doubled its defense budget, which is something it resisted for decades. So on the one hand, that's a plus. They also agreed initially to sending, first they didn't want to send military hardware, then they agreed to it, but then there's delays. So it's just unclear why the delay, what's going on. So I think Germany is a case that the rest of Europe is going to, and the U.S. needs to work on in order to get them fully on board in action, not just in words.
I was most interested in your comment about the internet. You said that it was not totally controlled. That was encouraging news to me. And I asked this question, well, to what extent is the internet still accessible to Russians? And I keep thinking about Radio Free Europe years ago and how techniques of that sort were capable of penetrating, the uniform narrative of the Russians. So you get the drift of my question.
Yeah.
Some kind of electronic method maybe of changing the narrative.
Yeah, I think the number one problem in Russia, which is actually similar in this country, is that people who do not want to hear the truth do not seek the truth. So people who are Putin supporters could go get different news from the internet, but they don't. They just watch state TV. So the precise people that you want to learn about something are the people who are most reluctant to go seek out other sources. And that's why the mere provision of alternative sources is not enough. But what Russia has done is it has closed down Facebook and Twitter and certain websites you cannot go to from Russia. People use VPNs in order to get around that, to go to them, but they're constantly threatening to shut down various VPN options. Now, a person can still go to the internet widely and search for something. So they can still find news, but some of the main sites that people might use have been closed down. But the biggest problem is that people have already they have some support for the regime, and so they stick with the regime messaging even though they know it's biased. I just want to note we have 1 minute, but I'm happy to answer questions afterwards for anybody if you didn't get a chance to answer a question.
Thanks for your insights. As you just noted, Russia's power and money derives from fossil fuels. How can we turn decarbonizing our economy into a way to support Ukraine?
Okay, this is a great question. And I want to note that we need to have a comprehensive discussion and solve problems in the United States in terms of our own energy consumption. We are the world's largest energy producer, but we're also the world's largest energy consumer. The reason we were importing Russian oil before this war started is because of our high level of consumption. So I think that's one of the things. But also the regulatory issues in the U.S. I think are sort of put on the back burner as just like, well, that's the way things work here. Even in Wisconsin, the pipeline up north, the prison that's in the news about should we build it or not. There are various public policy, the Dane County prison, public policy problems that we have that we sort of leave to the courts to say, well, let's see if somebody else can solve this for us. But the energy problems we have have to start with consumption, green energy, nuclear, different approaches, and actually solving the problem, rather than putting it off for some other people will decide this for us. So we could be a leader on this, though. Okay, well, thank you so much.